Well, today we are beginning our series on unpacking the baggage in your marriage by going under the surface. We're going to talk about maybe you have the same fights over and over. Maybe you find yourself overreacting sometimes, or maybe things just escalate quickly between you and your spouse and you don't know why. These might be signs that some underlying issues are affecting your marriage. So, listen in as we talk about how to deal with baggage that's hindering your marriage. So, Dr. Kim, what types of baggage might be affecting couples, whether it's from their own past or from their shared past together?
Yeah, let's define baggage too. I think the baggage in a relationship happens when somebody's still experiencing the residual effects of a past situation. In other words,
Mhm.
it's happened back here, it may have my childhood, wherever, but it's affecting me now and it's affecting this relationship. So
Mhm.
certainly we have it from childhood baggage. And it can be, depending on what age those things happen to you, how you interpret them, all those kind of things. So those things can last with people a long time. And I've talked to
Mhm.
people, like I remember one guy, he was in his mid 40s and something had happened when he was 8 years
Mm.
old, that someone had said something and that had defined him for all that time and he said, this is the first time I ever told anybody. So those kind of
Mm.
things can do that. And it was affecting him in a lot of ways in his marriage and other things. So I think you can bring those kind of things into your marriage. I think
Mhm.
financial baggage. I think
Mm.
if you haven't handled finances well in the past, then all of a sudden you're married and you're still not handling finances well. Before it affected one person, now it's affecting two people. So that
Mhm.
baggage of financial is doing that. I think relationship, past divorces, previous dating relationships, if there's some emotional scars from the past, if maybe someone was cheated upon, maybe they cheated,
Mm.
been mistreated in a previous relationship or marriage, so it's hard to build trust. So I think past relationships, one thing I talk to couples about as they get married is we got to make sure though anything from that has been dealt with. Are you okay
Right.
with that? Have you let go of that? Have you forgiven? Those kind of things. Because if not, they're going to come into your new relationship. There's going to be similar situations or something. You have some triggers. And
Mm.
then just emotional baggage, maybe guilt from the past, regrets. Sometimes with emotional baggage, you don't want to experience that pain again. And
Mm.
sometimes you're hard on yourself or you feel like, that things are just not, it's just going to happen and you're not going to be safe in this relationship. May have, people have PTSD. I mean, there's all kinds of emotional things that can come in. And so in those situations, they feel unsafe, they feel
Mhm.
threatened, it's hard for them to trust. So those are just probably, I think there's a number of things that you could categorize, but I think those are the ones that I see quite a bit. The childhood, finances, relationships, and emotional that a number of people seem to deal with.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's when you give that list, it's kind of hard to think that anyone might potentially not be carrying some
Oh
baggage
yeah,
because it sounds
that's
like
right.
almost anything.
Yes, unless you lived in a bubble, probably
Yeah.
because we've had I think I had it was a high school romance, but it was at that time it was my first romance, and so it
Mhm.
was like you think this is you're kind of naming the kids when you're with
Yeah.
her
Right.
in my mind. And so that breakup was hard. And so I think from that time, even the first time, I was cautious. I didn't want to get
Mhm.
hurt again.
Mhm.
Getting hurt when you're 16 still hurts, and because you don't have a bigger picture of things. And so I think that was some baggage that I had to deal with. And so the 2 years that Nancy and I dated, it was building trust with that. And probably for
Mhm.
both of us,
Mhm.
and deciding, okay, this is where I go and letting ourselves be more vulnerable with each other so we could have that connection that really let us know at a pretty young age this is who we want to be with.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, because those things, I mean, just as you list them out and share them, it's like you kind of forget sometimes about those little, maybe somebody made fun of you or said something on the school bus and it just really stuck with you and kind of shaped the way you viewed the world after that. And those things are real.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is really strange. Didn't have anything with marriage, but like in second grade, I still remember we were playing. It was recess, and we were playing kickball, and we were choosing teams, and I got chosen last, and I
Mm.
thought, "In the heck!" And so where was I? This was in the last 6 months. We were somewhere, and we were going to play a game, and someone was choosing teams, and that same feeling from second grade
Mm.
came over me. I'm going to be
Oh.
picked last. I wasn't, but it was like. So it just kind of, we just don't even realize sometimes how things
Yeah.
can, and you can't let something like happened on a playground in second grade define you.
Right.
I just look now,
Right.
there were two really stupid captains, is the way I would look at it now.
Well, it's funny because as you were saying that, it took me back to the recess, the field at PE, and kickball is pretty good, but baseball, softball, I was awful. Hand-eye coordination too. I was picked last every time, and for good reason, honestly. But it's just a terrible feeling. You're just standing there, everyone else's name
Oh,
gets
you're just
called. Oh,
praying that they will. I can remember somebody, captain, was kind of a quasi friend. Before they picked, I just tell them how great they were and how much I liked them, and thank you for being my friend. And
oh my
you know,
gosh,
it's funny things that you do at that age, because nobody wants to
yeah.
be picked last, which it
Nobody
didn't
wants
really
to.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah. And it probably like half of everybody listening is right now just like really having that feeling
Oh
come up
yeah.
in them. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
okay. So that's actually a great lead into my next question for you
Okay.
because you just brought up something I hadn't thought about and now it's very vivid in my mind. But I've read that when we don't deal with things like this, that they end up driving our actions more than we ever realize. So do you see that in counseling? Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, I think just kind of examples we gave of those triggers that can
Mm-hmm.
take us back. Well, they're there, and so something may happen that triggers something in your marriage. Thing that happened with me with kickball wasn't something triggered a few months ago with my marriage, but it could have affected me if I held on to those things.
Mm-hmm.
But things can trigger, remind you of a previous relationship from your childhood, some of the things um, that we have done, and then I think the other thing is sometimes we can develop some real controlling behavior out of that if we
Mm-hmm.
haven't dealt with it, because we don't get hurt again.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I put all these safeguards in place and I don't get myself be vulnerable, then I won't get hurt. The problem is you
Mm-hmm.
won't ever have the marriage you want either, because you're not
Mm-hmm.
willing to deal with that and let those go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Inconsistent emotions, like I've seen people that because of the past, they may be optimistic about a new relationship, and the next day they feel distant.
Hmm.
um, the emotional baggage makes us that fear to connect.
Hmm.
um, so I think there are those unhealed hurts, past trauma, that can come out in your marriage relationship,
Mm-hmm.
especially I think if they're relational by people important to you as you were growing up, which would be usually parents,
Mm-hmm.
which could be first or relationships, or early marriage, or some things like that. And so I think it's we if we don't deal with things, they don't just go away. And
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we hope they will. Certainly you can pray, and I've seen God heal things. I never
Mm-hmm.
would say that doesn't happen, but I also know God also uses Him working our lives to work through things to
Mm-hmm.
bring healing, because there may be more He wants to teach us than
Mm.
just kind of zapping us and all of a sudden we're okay. Zap's probably not a good word
No.
for God, but anyway, you know what I
Right.
mean.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's always good to kind of take a look at ourselves from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's where I'm pushing counseling again. But I think having a Christian counselor that you can go, even if you go once a year after you
Mm-hmm.
establish your relationship, just to kind of get a tune up, and let's see if the counselor pick up anything. This is kind of what I'm struggling with now. What do you think about this? Those kind of things help to have an objective person that cares for you and is going to come to you from a Christian perspective, that will give you good counsel and will pray for you and pray with you, those kind of things. So yes, if those are there,
Mm-hmm.
they need to be identified and
Mm-hmm.
dealt with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's going to be hard to do that. I guess we'll get more into it, but I'm thinking about it's going to be hard to do it if you're not aware of it. Like if it's something that you've smushed down and tried to ignore, that's going to be an issue. But let me first ask, so what are some ways that those unhealed hurts or the past traumas are expressed in a marriage? How would that affect the spouse relationship?
Well, I think we talked about, so if you've been hurt and you try to control, say
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you're not a team anymore. You're trying to control this person, so it can
Mm-hmm.
certainly can come out that way. And then I think just your emotions can be all over the place, and so you're
Mm-hmm.
inconsistent with those, and so your spouse is getting all kinds of mixed message in there, and it's probably not much fun for you either. It's probably
Mm-hmm.
confusing, and that's why I think it's to pray from time to time. God, surface anything in my life that needs to be dealt with, and trust Him with that, because He's not going to surface anything that He does not have an answer for you
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
walk through that with. And so those are a couple of things I think happen. I think just depending on what your emotional baggage is, there can be fears associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship. Do I from trusting or to that other person I was with,
Mm-hmm.
and they did some things I didn't think they'd ever do. Is this person going to do that because I was damaged there? Whatever those
Mm-hmm.
things are, and I think when it comes from a parent, and I think it affects with both parents, but you have seen more where it's a father daughter, where the father um, says something to a daughter at a time that crushes her, and
Mm,
she carries that forward because that was the time with that person, the most important person in their
mm,
life.
mm-hmm.
And so if you've been in those situations, it's surfacing those things. It's
Mm-hmm.
forgiving that father, because most of the time they didn't mean to do it. They
Mm-hmm.
just whatever said it, and then realizing that does not define you. And I think that's a big picture for all of these things that we have with baggage. That baggage does not define who you are. God
Mm.
defines who you are. Baggage is something in your life you have to deal with, but that not does not define you. I think it's so important to know that, because I think some people just label themselves and that's going to be this way forever. No, God's got something better for you, and He's got something better for your marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. You can say that again.
Okay.
That's so good. um, as you're saying that, I'm seeing the quote being written, because that's one we're gonna have to share. That baggage does not define you, God does. That is so good.
Yeah.
And so a couple other things I think about in this. You talked some with Chris and Jamie Bailey of Expedition Marriage about this kind of idea of like making these assumptions or emotional rationalization, where because of our emotions we explain or assume what our spouse meant to do. And that was on a Facebook Live, but it just made me think about how our own baggage can make us jump to conclusions. It can lead to making assumptions because, if you let me down in some way, like say you were going to swing by the store and you forgot to swing by the store, it's easy to assume a negative intent or like some kind of
Mm-hmm.
character issue rather than just the simplest explanation, which is just forgetting when we're carrying some kind of baggage that's unhealed. So if we're concerned that our spouse doesn't care about us and then they forget to stop by the store, then it's like, oh, now I really see they don't care about me. But that's not really the picture, is it?
No, I think it makes sense. It made me think of a couple, and this was really interesting. He ended up taking a night job, or Horty didn't get home till like about midnight, and it was earn more money. It was for a period of time, but she just wasn't all in on that. One of his pet peeves was he really liked the kitchen counters clean, tidy. So when he would come in at midnight or so and he'd fix him something to eat, there were always crumbs left on the counter. And his assumption was, for weeks, she's doing that to get at me because the comes are there every night. So she's just mad. She's being passive aggressive. Well, what we found out was the 10-year-old was getting up and having a snack after mom got to bed and was leaving the crumbs there. And so once all that came to light, I think it was a great thing for them, because then he
Yeah.
realized, is my wife doing this? It's my kid that's sneaking cookies at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And so I think we just kind of get in those and make those assumptions sometimes it's that negative framing of our spouse. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we always want to look for the best in our spouse. And if you have a
Mm.
question, now what he should have done is said, when I got home, there were crumbs on the counter. Why did you not notice them or something?
Mm-hmm.
And then she can say, well, no, I made sure everything was clean when I went to bed. And
Mm-hmm.
then they can start figuring it out together.
Yeah.
But when you let it go, and every night he was getting a little more angry and a little more mad and all that kind of stuff, but then he would go back to sleep. And so he wouldn't see her till sometime during the day. And by then he'd forgot about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it just went on and on and on. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example too. And I think the other way that maybe this is how I would handle it, I don't know, and it's not good, but would be to go, hey, you left crumbs. What'd you do that for? And not even ask. Not even ask, did you? But like, I saw that you did this clearly, because you just make that assumption and then you
Yeah.
operate as if it's true. And it's not always or often.
Exactly. So you take
Mm-hmm.
your actions on that. Yeah. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
he started doing something he knew she didn't like.
Oh,
Oh,
gosh.
she's being passive aggressive. Well, I can do that too, And so we
Right.
get into these stupid games. And I think you always have to go, your filter always has to be, does this help my marriage or not? And if it's not
Mm,
helping it, why are you doing it?
yeah. Yes. Yeah. And this is something too, you addressed this during the boundary series, but sometimes it's just a habit. Sometimes we have these terrible habits And we have to figure out some place to interrupt the habit so you can get in a healthier pattern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it does take some work sometimes, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be better.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so okay, what would prevent people from dealing with this baggage? Why aren't we taking care of business and moving on?
Well, I think you said something earlier that I agree with, that sometimes we aren't aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I think sometimes people tell me they aren't aware, but 10 people in their lives are tell them this is. So you got to
Oh,
kind of
okay.
listen
Okay.
sometimes
All
to
right.
friends too. I think denial. So denial would
Mm-hmm.
definitely be part of it. This can't be me. The fear, we mentioned fear, how do I even deal with this? And I think it is not know how do I deal with this? Okay, now I know
Mm-hmm.
what it is. How do I deal with it? And so I think sometimes it's just helping people see that there is a step they can take, and maybe it's prayer, it's talking to their spouse about it. Hey, I just realized this. How's it affecting you? Just get some things on the table to talk about. If it's deeper, get some counseling, spend some
Mm-hmm.
time with that so you can really work through it and get it resolved,
Mm-hmm.
because there's always an answer for that. So I think when you discover you have baggage, you want to do whatever you can do to eliminate that, to check
Mm-hmm.
your baggage, get it
Mm-hmm.
out, get it away
Mm-hmm.
from you. And then I think that the denial thing is sometimes that's one of the hardest things for us, is that we
Mm-hmm.
just don't want to admit that we have a problem here, uh, but I think what I would say, one, pray about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
two, is it affecting my marriage? Is this is something with me affecting your marriage? It's always so good to point the finger back at yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because we're really good about pointing the finger at them, our
Mm-hmm.
spouse. And so anytime you take and say, okay, God, search my heart. Is there something there that needs to be dealt with? Is there some baggage? Is there
Mm-hmm.
something? Would you surface that and help me work through it? Journaling can be really helping that too. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you take aside, do those prayers, journal for a few weeks and see what God reveals to you. But whatever it is, and you said I always have baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is an exercise we can all do
Mm-hmm.
from time to time. And as you go into different stages of life, you may have some baggage surface that hadn't surfaced before.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 5 years of marriage and then you have a child, you may not have any baggage in 5 years of marriage. But when you have a
Mm-hmm.
child, it brings back some things when you were a child or something else. So
Yeah.
it can come up at different stages of your life too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's something we always have to be aware of. And if I'm doing something that is continuing to cause a problem for Nancy and in our marriage, then I need to look at myself, when my
Mm-hmm.
tendency would be to say, well, what the heck is wrong with her now? Things
Right.
were really going good and now something's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What's going on in my life at that time? And just taking the time to look inside with God's help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. And I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of hard to maybe one big deterrent is that you just don't know what to do about it. So maybe there's something, but you shy away from looking deeper because you don't know what the heck to do about it. But then I love what you're saying about, what you're always great at pointing us to. You have to look at yourself and point the finger at yourself, because you can't even do anything. Even if you were to identify 8 things about your spouse, it doesn't matter,
Right.
because they're themselves and God is in charge of them and the Holy Spirit's convicting them. But if you identify 8 things in yourself, or one thing or whatever, you can actually begin to work on changing that and growing. And that's better for your marriage. It's better for yourself and everything. So even if it's a little daunting or a lot daunting, it's not fruitless, because once you start the process, you're going to start to heal from it.
Yeah. And you can maybe start with you and God. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
God does lead you to a counselor. Maybe he'll lead you to your pastor, whatever that is. But take that first step with God and see where he leads that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, all right, that's some good, strong encouragement. So if you've got something, or if 10 people in your life are telling you to, you better start listening, because
Yes.
it's not going to work to ignore that. So as Christians, we might believe or assume that when we accept Jesus for salvation, he will automatically heal our past. And so he does forgive all of our sins, but that doesn't mean all of our baggage goes away. So how does that work out? How does that play out, Dr. Kim?
No, it does not mean that all that goes away. That would be nice, but that's not the way God intended it, and that's
Mm.
not the way things are right now. And so,
Mhm.
so one of the best examples I thought that was really good visual, I heard someone say years and years ago, I mean, they're talking about Lazarus, Jesus' friend that died.
Mhm.
And so Jesus comes and raises him from the dead. And so we get this picture of Lazarus coming out of the tomb. Well, he's got life again, but he's still got the grave cloths all over him. And
Mhm.
he comes to Jesus, and Jesus takes the grave cloths out of him. And I think that's such
Mm.
a great example. He was raised to new life, like we
Mhm.
have been with Christ, but we've still got these grave clothes on us. And we need
Mm.
God's help in taking those things off. And
Mhm.
so when we accept Jesus, when we become a Christian, the difference is we've got him to walk beside us, to carry us through the healing process, to whatever needs to be done, whatever cloths need to be taken off of us,
Mhm.
and that he's trustworthy to do that. So I think if we can get that picture of he's not going to just all of a sudden everything's be great, you're going to have this.
Mhm.
And Jesus tells us in John, in this life you'll have troubles, but
Mhm.
be of good faith or whatever, you're
Mhm.
be happy because I've overcome the world,
Yeah.
my translation.
Yeah.
And and so know that that's part of life. And but every time, I mean, if I look back at my life, the things that hard things I've gone through that I've allowed him, ask him in to help me with, are the things where I've learned the most and grown the most.
Mhm.
When things are great, I enjoy it. I love it. I love laughing all the time, being happy all the time.
Mhm.
But I probably don't grow that much. I just enjoy life at that time. But my
Mhm.
growth has come as he's shown me there's always a way out in every situation. And he's there to walk with it, walk me through it.
Mhm. That's a great example. I love that example of Lazarus because I think it's I think we all kind of wish it were the other way. I think we kind of wish that,
Oh, yeah.
like Jesus does change everything, but also there's the process of confronting all the patterns and the thoughts and the beliefs we have, and that's where maturity comes in our faith. And Jesus spoke about that in the parable of the good soil when he talks about some people received, but then they didn't stick with it or work it out or grow down roots, and they didn't proceed in growing their faith, so their faith withered. And I think when we have this sort of um hope, like, I don't want to call it hopeful, but it's a perspective that Jesus would just automatically change
Yeah.
everything, then that's not going to lead us to a deeper faith that actually sustains us. So it's tough, but I think we need to make that distinction as believers, because a lot of times there is this idea that persists that, like, I have the gospel, so what else do I need? But the Bible's really clear. You have to continue to renew your mind and work out what you've learned and follow what Jesus taught, not just believe it. Jesus was very clear about that.
Yeah. And we don't live in heaven now. We live in a fallen
No.
world. And
Yeah.
so as long as we're in this world, there's, you're going to have hard times, but
Mm.
sometimes, God's there to help us through it and to help us learn from it. And, it's really just part of what we learn in this life,
Mm.
and helping others and preparing us for heaven someday.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's really hopeful too, because the scriptures are not quiet on this topic.
No.
So there's a lot of great wisdom to be found there. And I'll just go ahead and put some of those in the show notes too. Sometimes I like to just add some scripture because it's really great to have a biblical basis.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think sometimes that's where I kind of get upset sometimes when I hear a pastor maybe that's pretty much prosperity theology, which
Hmm.
there are some truths in that. Absolutely.
Hmm.
But it's not always, if I give $100 to the church, the chances of me opening my mailbox the next day and getting that $10,000 check, or, that's just not the way it works.
Hmm.
We give because God wants us to give. And so I think sometimes when we hear that from a pastor, the kind of prosperity, then I think it's harder to deal with that reality. And then you
Hmm.
start thinking, what did I do wrong? Well,
Oh.
nothing. You're a Christian. God's forgiven you. This is just part of life. And so I
Hmm.
think, I just want to add that in for, because that can be confusing, I think, when you hear the prosperity theology, which basically means you give and God's going to give you everything. Well, he is. He's given us
Hmm.
eternal life, but he may not give us some of the other things. We may not get that new car like
Mm.
somebody else, whatever.
Right. Like that pastor probably did when he got everyone to give him.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that, but your pastor's wife, you
Well,
can say that.
we know what's going on out there. Well,
Yes.
yeah, no, I think that's a really good distinction, because I do think that going along with that is the mindset we were talking about, that, if you just have the gospel, then you don't have to do anything else. And for our salvation, absolutely, the gospel is all you need. But then for working it out, the scriptures say, work out your salvation. And so that's
Yeah,
consistent. You got to keep on walking into that and
absolutely.
breaking free. That's really good. So what would you say, what advice would you offer to someone? So if someone's listening to the conversation and they're really resonating with it and they were suspecting, okay, Dr. Kim, you're stepping on my toes. There's some stuff that's probably going on. I'm getting the signals, but they don't know what to do. What would you say to that person?
Well, I think you do look for the signs. And I think, if there's a lack of trust in your marriage, look at it from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling paranoid, I mean, everybody's out to get me. If you're anger, if you're having guilt, if you're having regret, if in closeness in your marriage, you find it hard or stressful really to let yourself get close to your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
You're needy. You need a lot more from your spouse than they do from you. Now, different times in life we do. I think in a marriage that balances out over time. But I'm talking about really needy, where it's like you just got to have everything from this person. Control, that you are asking, your spouse, okay, what are you going to be doing all day? Give me your calendar for Sunday and Monday and Tuesday and all that kind of thing. You're oversensitive. Your emotional reactions are just a little extreme. Obviously you want some sensitivity, but sometimes it just kind of craters people. And so that would be a red flag. And then reassurance to know that you have to know what your partner or your spouse is thinking, what they're feeling. You want to know all the time that they love you, that they think everything great about you, they would never leave you, and those kind of things. So if any of those things surface, that'd be kind of a good checklist to kind of go through. Did any of those things ring a bell? Did any of those things, do you see any of those qualities in you, that closeness, neediness, control, sensitivity, reassurance? Do you feel like your trust is hard, more anger, more paranoia? What is my spouse doing? Blah, blah, blah. Guilt, those kind of things. So if those things are there, then maybe they may be related to some baggage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I also heard you say at the beginning that look for the signs. So it's kind of like if, we're at the beginning, we talked about denial. So this is kind of flipping that around and getting curious and saying, what am I seeing? What am I observing? What are people saying to me? Or even asking for feedback from your spouse or people close to you.
Yeah, if you're having all those issues consistent, I know probably all of us can have some of those at times in our marriage, but if it's something that's consistent, then I could see someone suspecting. That's when you think, oh, maybe there is a past issue that hasn't healed, and that's why this keeps coming up, because my spouse really is faithful, and my spouse really is trustworthy. They've never given me anything to trust. I mean, I still feel that way. Why do I feel that way? And so you begin to ask yourself some questions, and you realize, well, yeah, it's because of Johnny that I dated when I was 16, or it's maybe because my dad was an absent father, and I'm bringing that forth. So my husband goes on a business trip, and I have this fear that he'll never come back, even though it's unrealistic. And so you start beginning to dig and look and try to let God help you connect the pieces there.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's good. I think as we were talking though, it just made me think of one more place. I don't think that we mentioned this earlier. Do you think that in a marriage, unresolved conflict between the spouses is a type of baggage in the marriage?
I think so, depending on probably how damaging it was, how intense it was, maybe how it escalated. I think if you were hurt, or I think anytime you get in conflict and it becomes a win-lose instead of a win for the marriage, then I think a negative thing happens to one person, really to both, but the person who won doesn't see it that way. That I won, they don't realize the damage that's doing to a marriage. So yes, I could see things that happened then, and then how that could cause you to react a certain way in the future. And some things like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about all these different things that are coming up as we're talking. So it's get it all out.
Well, it is, and there's a lot of scenarios. Yeah, anything you can think of that people might identify with in that, for sure.
Yeah, because where we want to go with this is that we're not afraid to confront these things and to start just really actively looking for that information, so we can actively look for that healing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So what if a listener is sensing that their spouse might be dealing with unresolved issues? Can they call that out, or will that just create more problems?
I probably think I would probably say just in general that depends, to really how well do you know your spouse? Can you talk to them about things like that? Because if you can say, maybe I know your childhood was rough, or some things with a previous spouse, and I know those things you've said. I can just tell we've talked about how it affects you, and maybe I want to help you. I want to walk with you. I want you to trust me. How can I help? And so you talk about communicating better, maybe being more patient with that person and understanding. Make sure you're always honest in the situation. Stay positive. Have empathy. I think empathy is so important in these situations. The more you can put yourself in your spouse's shoes, look at it from their perspective, because on your end, it maybe doesn't make sense because you grew up in a home where your parents were great. You don't have had any issues or any problems with that at all. And so you're thinking, well, that's just silly. No, they grew up in a different place than you did. Can you have empathy there? Listening really well, and then be willing to go to counseling with your spouse. Sometimes maybe their spouse needs it more than you do. Go with them that first time. Let the counselor say, hey, I want you all to continue to come together, or hey, I'd like to meet with you alone for a while because we've identified these issues today. So I think you don't want to just live with it and not address it at some point. It's figuring out who your spouse is and what's the best approach, but approaching it as a team. I want to come alongside you. I know God's got something better for us. And I'm willing to walk through this with you. All those things will help.
That's good. That's really good. It's always back to that team approach.
It makes such a difference, doesn't it? I mean, when Nancy and I are not a team, and we do so much better than we used to, but man, we used to fight battles alone. That just never worked. Not like it will when you're a team, because when you work as a team and you're fighting a battle, you win. Your marriage wins. You're on the same page, and working it together.
Yeah. When I think this could be really helpful for like thinking about it in terms of like a marriage, like your spouse, your spouse better than anyone else knows them, and they know you better. So if we are in this posture that we've been talking about through this episode of actually looking for the information and wanting that feedback, then that's going to help if our spouse is willing to bring something up, because it'll help us to kind of narrow in on it and get some more information about how we might be presenting this baggage to the world that we can't really see. So that would be a helpful thing. So if a couple is listening together, they can sort of have an easy initiation into that conversation. But if it's just one spouse, it would be helpful, like you said, Dr. Kim, knowing what you know about your spouse and using a lot of empathy and like a partnership there.
And you mentioned, yes, I totally agree with all that. I also made me think of a lady that said she listened to one of our podcasts and felt it really fit them. So she just invited her husband to listen to it with her again. And when he did, it helped him hear what she heard. It helped them be on the same page in addressing the issue that we talked about at that time. And that gave her a way to get into something that she'd been aware of, thought about, but just didn't know how to bring it up. And so by using the podcast, she was able to get into that subject with her husband in a really positive way.
That's awesome. I love hearing that.
Yeah, I did. I thought it was so cool.
That's super cool. So just know, if your spouse invited you to listen to this, or if they forwarded it to you, it's because they love you. It's not because they're trying to change you.
No. Or if they are, let us know. Because that's not right.
We didn't say to change. No, you cannot change somebody. But I do think that it's really helpful to have a little bit of an easy entry anytime you can get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes especially for us guys, it's a lot easier for us to listen to a podcast or something like that than you hand us a book to read. Because we're thinking, my feeling is with most guys, if you're going to hand them a book, get it on tape, get an audio book so they can listen to it in their car and stuff like that. Because most guys, my experience has been I really don't assign books anymore unless I want them to listen to something, because people don't seem to read like they used to. So you got to be, then you're going to be mad because that book is. I had a lady tell me one time, and this was before I quit using books as much and recommending audiobooks. And I said, this would be a really good book. And I was just meeting with her, and she goes, I'll stack it it'll be number 10 on the stack of books that I've got next to the side of the bed. I thought, okay, we're not going that way.
Yeah.
Good information. I need to know that.
When our counselor assigned us a book, I read it because I like paper books, and Brian listened to it. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. And whatever
Yeah.
works, I listen to everything now. I've got one book. I've got a paper book that I heard someone talk about. That's probably about a 400-page book. I've been working on it for 5 months now because I just don't pick it up and read it that much, but I love it. Every time I read, I think, I need to read this more and get finished. So I just turned into page 400, I think, and it's only, so I'm getting there.
Sounds like a good one.
But on audio, and I tried to find it on audio. That was the thing. Well, the book was self-published and it's not on audio.
So you're stuck.
So I'm stuck. Exactly.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's good point. Valid digression. So I think we've done a good job kind of covering a lot of what is it? How do we, start to deal with it? How do we know it's there? And then also just getting on the same page and trying to work for some healing, either individually or together. So
Absolutely.
what final piece of advice would you give our listeners today, Dr. Kim?
Well, I loved what you said earlier, Lindsay, when you said we all have baggage, because we do, from somewhere or some way or another. And so I think it's just maybe just take some time and say, God, if there's something, would you reveal that? Would you surface that? And then just journal and see what God does with you on that. Maybe do that maybe once a week for a few weeks and see if anything surfaces, and just trust God to surface anything that's going to make your life better, or of who he created you to be, your marriage better, and trust him to do that. And I think that would be time really well spent. I think it's hard for us to slow down and do something like that, but maybe think of your week and a time where maybe you've got a window of 30 minutes to an hour where you could just really sit alone and do this. If you got young kids, it may be after everybody's in bed one night. Whatever that is, I think you'd never regret taking the time to do that and see what God does.
That's really good. That's great advice. Yeah, if you've got old kids, it's in the morning because they are not around in early hours.
There you go.
That's my saving grace. Early dark hours.
Yes.
Well, that's really good. So if you have any questions or concerns or need prayer, just always feel free to reach out to us at info@awesomemarriage.com. We always love hearing from you, and we answer all of our emails. So if you need us, that's where you can find us. Tune in next week because we have an awesome interview coming with Dr. Kelly Flanagan, continuing on this subject. So make sure you tune in to hear that interview with Dr. Kim and Dr. Kelly Flanagan. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.